Here's how it happens. I got my sketch pad, my pencil. I lay on the floor, sometimes in my underwear, it doesn't matter, right? I work at home, and I get to just draw pictures. The only difference between when I was a kid and now is I'm getting paid, and not a little bit either. It's pretty cool.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and with me today is my good friend Josh, and we're going to talk about his favorite creative duo, Snyder and Greg Capullo. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back, and I'm excited to talk about the two big superstars and the superstars of rock in the comic book world.
Yeah, in many ways, Snyder and Capullo are probably the best known creative duo in comics today. They're the best modern pairing. They're basically a license to print money. Everything they do together turns into gold. It started out with Batman. They did Dark Knight's Metal together. They just recently did a DC Black Label Last Night on Earth, which is the conclusion of their Batman run, and they're about to start their death metal event. We think it's going to be called Death Metal. Of course, that hasn't been confirmed yet. I believe you started reading Snyder and Capullo on their Batman run. What was it about that run that really drew you in and made you think that this was the best creative pairing in comics?
Well, that was when I first got into comic books. The first trade I ever picked up was Court of Owls. And I read that, and it was just something about Capullo's version of Batman. Like, he looks so gritty and so intense. Like, he does a really good job at drawing Batman's eyes, which is kind of weird to say, but he has this really good style where he just draws him as this giant black shadow figure, and you can only see his eyes. And I've always liked that. And just kind of flipping through that book at the comic book store, the Court of Owls trade, I just I wasn't even reading the text. I was just looking at the pictures, and I'm like, oh my God, this is absolutely amazing. This just looks incredible. Every page was so intense and gritty and detailed. And I bought it, and that was game over. I read it in one night. I went back to the comic store the next day, and I think the floppies were at issue 19 or 20. And I just bought all the floppies I could find. I ended up working my way backwards and bought all of Court of Owls. I even dropped $90 on Batman #1 by them. So I have the whole run. It's like my prized thing of my collection. But just the way that Snyder knows Batman and he explores these lores of Gotham too is just. They're just a perfect blend together. It's just so good. To kind of jump into that, not having any knowledge of the comic books, and to jump into Snyder talking about these secret groups in Gotham, and then we got into Zero Year, which was the redo of his origin story. Oh, it was just really good. The whole run was fantastic.
In many ways, if you think about Scott Snyder before he finally ascended up to Batman, he started out essentially as a horror comic writer, and then you look at Greg Capullo, who got his big break on Todd McFarlane's Spawn. His gothic visuals are essentially tailor-made for the Batman character. And then when you have Scott Snyder and his he really likes to dig deep into the lore, and he is very much a horror writer. So you have another creator that's tailor-made for Batman, especially if you want to look at some of those horror elements that really work beautifully with Capullo's art in Gotham and some of Batman's rogues gallery. But the Court of Owls, that's a hell of an introduction to Batman. Really the standout threat that Snyder ever created in Batman lore. What was it about the Court of Owls that really drew you into that group?
It was. I always kind of thought Batman was invincible. He always had a plan. No one could ever, get one step ahead of him. No one could ever scare him. And when I read The Court of Owls, all of that kind of came crashing down because they scared him. They were one step ahead of him for most of the arc, and they beat his ass. The Talons did a number on him. I think the one issue that really just sold me to comic books, I just cashed my soul at the door, was issue number 9, when the Talons, and it was part of Night of the Owls, when the Talons invaded the Batcave. And you see Batman Bruce just kind of walk out in this giant like mecha bat suit battle armor thing, and he just opens up this door and there's like 20 Talons, and he just says, "Get the hell out of my house." And from that point on, it was just game over. Like, I liked the way that the Talons looked, because they kind of had the same thing as Batman. Like, he drew them as these dark, shadowy figures where you wouldn't even really be able to see them. You just saw their eyes, and they had like those giant glowing eyes that were like owl eyes, which is what they were supposed to be, obviously. But just the way that Capullo drew them, and they always looked so like gothic and so intimidating. And, you know, like the masks that the court members wore, like just those plain white masks, they always looked really cool. And like he drew them with like bony hands and stuff. They looked like decrepit, like witch people or something. It was just really, really well done. I mean, and Snyder just used them to establish so much lore with Gotham. He quickly built up their own lore. Like, he established them as a credible threat to Batman in very quick time. And not just to Batman, but to the whole Batman family. You know, like, there was this deep-rooted threat in Gotham all along, and nobody knew about it. And, you know, then they come out and start pushing people's shit, and it was really, really good. Like, just the fact that Snyder could so quickly establish such a credible threat, and you know, establish so much lore for the Batman family so quickly in, you know, 12 issues or however long it took. That you don't see that very often. And you could tell that him and Capullo were working on the same page. They definitely both of them have their roots in horror and gothic style. Because it definitely shows off in Snyder's lore writing and Capullo's art, for sure.
Yeah, and I believe they specifically connected it to Dick Grayson, who's your favorite character, correct?
Yeah. He was the Grayson of Gotham. He was in line to be, because they said that Howley Circus was kind of like a breeding ground or a selection ground for the Talons. That every so often they would pick, you know, a performer from Howley Circus to be the next Talon, and he was in line for that. That was such a cool moment when, you know, they're talking in the Batcave, and you know, Bruce had just recovered from being underground in the court's hideout prisoner for days, and, you know, Dick comes down and he's like, you know, "You want to talk about it?" He just gets punched in the mouth, and you see his tooth fly out, and, you know, he's like, "What the hell did you do that for?" And Bruce is like, "You were supposed to be one." And he picks up the tooth, and then under it is, you know, it's like the court symbol is under the filling of the tooth. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And even Dick was like, "Oh my God, what's happening? I don't know any of this, and this is crazy." And I mean, he ends up fighting the Talon that is his grandfather, William Cobb, which I actually did quite a bit of that in my thesis writing. I covered that because it kind of shows Nightwing and Batman's style. Like, you know, they're fighting these Talons who can regenerate. You know, you can't break their bones, they just heal, and they have to find unique ways to stop them. So,
you know, that's really one of Snyder's strengths. I don't know if it's always been his strength, but it's certainly been one at DC Comics, where he never has a singular vision where he's just running on his own. He's always adding things and helping out other creators, you know, like with adding to Nightwing's lore. And that, of course, he ends up going beyond Batman. Eventually he starts adding a lot to the DC lore, especially like the Source Wall, and he ends up introducing the Dark Multiverse. And we got, you know, the last real mega event from DC Comics, Dark Knight's Metal. It's Snyder, it's Capullo, and it's Snyder basically creating a bunch of new characters based on Batman, where basically he gets powers, you know, power sets. You know, there's a Batman Aquaman version, there's a Batman Green Lantern, there's a Superman Batman, and all these things. And of course, the Batman Who Laughs, being the Batman Joker mashup, became the standout character. But what did you think about Dark Knight's Metal and the way they executed that? We know that you liked it. We've talked about that on the channel. What about it did you like it? You know, how well was it executed, and what character really stood out for you?
My personal favorite character from Metal was the Red Death. the Batman that was
Flash.
that kind of fused with Barry Allen. I believe Josh Williamson wrote the one-shot story for that, and that with I think Howard Porter might have had some of the art in there. I think it was basically the creative team from The Flash at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That book is a spectacle. It is a book that I own. I think there were 4 printings of it, and I own multiple copies of all 4 printings. I just kept buying it over and over. It's just the story behind it, where you have Batman take he basically, it's implied he killed the rogues and he took all of their tools. So he had Mirror Master's weapons, he had Captain Cold's cold gun, he had Heatwave's heat gun, and he basically hunted down the Flash and said, "Give me the Speed Force or I'll take it from you." And of course, Barry's like, because something bad, the Bat family had been killed off, and Batman wanted to go back in time to save them. And the Flash, who knows the consequences of that, wouldn't let him do it. So he said, "Fine, if you're not gonna do it for me, I'm gonna take it." And he did. He stole the Speed Force from Barry, and they ended up merging into the Red Death. That to me was like, my mind just melted. It was amazing. As far as a standout issue of Metal goes, it's in my top favorite comic books of all time. It's a one-shot that Snyder co-wrote with Grant Morrison, The Wild Hunt. Mm-hmm. That book was awesome because you could just see
That's Detective Chimp one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was one of the wildest, weirdest books I've ever read in my life.
Yep, and the best part about that book is that, well, it brought back Detective Chimp, which was awesome. But you can see Grant Morrison for me is hit or miss. He's a coin flip writer. He's either on point or he just completely misses the mark. But with that book, you could tell his and Snyder's love of the DC universe and these odds and ends corners of it, and just the general multiversal lore. You could tell that love was there, and it was on full scale in that book. You had things coming in from every different era of DC. You had things from pre-Crisis, from Crisis on Infinite Earths, from Final Crisis, all these big times in the DC universe. You had these things popping up. They brought back the Ultima Thule. They went into the time bleed, it's called, or the bleed or something like that, where time just kind of all runs together. And and I believe that's also the book where the Red Death had his redemption arc, where he finally snapped and turned against the Batman Who Laughs plan. And like, you kind of saw him reverse his polarities, and he went from being the Red Death, he turned gold. So it kind of reminded me of like the Reverse Flash. And they're birthing a mini universe in that ship and stuff. Oh man, it was just wild. And I remember having to read that book like 6 times before I understood everything that happened in it. And absolutely. At the end, I think that's when you kind of saw like all the Batmen from the multiverse come in, and you had like the Dark Knight Returns Batman, you had like the Blood Rain Batman, the vampire one and stuff. And I think you had a Detective Chimp version of Batman, like a monkey version of Batman. That book was it was really a wild hunt. It was a wild ride, start to finish. That's the standout issue of Metal to me. That's how you do an event book. It's wild, it's colorful, there's all these crazy references to all these different time periods in DC. It was just, you could tell that Snyder and Morrison's love for DC lore was on full tilt in that book.
Yeah, some of those side books are really good. I love the Red Death myself. Of course, these aren't Snyder and Capullo, but they're certainly inspired by them. And my favorite was Dawnbreaker, which was written by Robert City and illustrated, by Ethan Van Sciver, probably the best Green Lantern artist of all times. And the origin story of that one is so good. Bruce sees his parents get murdered, and he finds the ring, but his will is so broken by the event that he just saw, that he just witnessed, that his spirit like breaks the ring, and he becomes just this disfigured, terrible version. But he's got all the powers of a Green Lantern. Like I said, his will broke the ring. Really love that story. That was the standout one for me. But I'm with you. The Red Death is right there with it. And the Wild Hunt is it's probably the most bonkers thing. It's one of the most bonkers comics I've ever read in my life.
And that's what I love about comics, and that's why I loved Metal, because it was off the wall. You had so and like you said about Snyder didn't have, you know, he didn't write that Red Death story. He didn't. I don't think he wrote any of the one shots that gave all of the evil Batmen their origin stories. I'm pretty sure they were all written by the creative teams on that hero or that version's book. So the Green Lantern, the Dawnbreaker, which is my second favorite one.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that spawned out of that. You know, like you said, it reintroduced detectiveship. I know Hawkman was reintroduced, in Dark Knight's Metal, and it spun out the New Age of Heroes comics. Unfortunately, they didn't land quite where they should have landed, but there was a lot of great comics in that. But it's kept going. We've gotten the Batman Who Laughs miniseries. We've got basically the Batman Superman team up book has spun out of that. We've got Hell Arisen, by James Tynion. It's all going on. Of course, it's leading up to the sequel to Dark Knight's Metal. Greg Capullo, Scott Snyder back together. This apparently is going to be the last time Scott Snyder does capes for a while for what we think is going to be called death metal. How excited are you for this upcoming event?
I am so excited. I'm approaching it with a bit of trepidation, though, because to me, I think this is going to be the end of the DC universe as I know it. But I'm not totally sure. That's the gut feeling I have. But I also feel like it's going to go out with a bang. It's going to go out with these two guys, reuniting to give basically a sequel to Metal, which is probably my favorite comic book event of all time. I don't think I'll ever be as excited to be into comics as I was when Metal was coming out. I don't think I'll ever be like that again. So I'm super excited for this. I want to see where they go with things. Honestly, I'm just excited to have Snyder and Capullo together back on a book. I don't care how long it's going to be. If it's only going to be 3 issues, if it's going to be 6 with a bunch of tie-ins, I don't care. I'll buy all of it. It's going to be great. I'm excited to see them come back and see what kind of mess they can get the DC universe and themselves into. And I'm just kind of excited to see Snyder finally get to kind of wrap up his wild, crazy DC universe ride and kind of see his ideas. Some of his ideas lately, I feel like there's been different creative forces that have kind of not pushed back against his ideas, but they've made them seem like they might not be the direction DC wants to go in. So I'm kind of glad, I'm mainly referring to the way that Bendis has been handling Lex Luthor. Like, Snyder has spent so much time building up Apex Lex, and they don't seem to want to get fully behind that. So I'm kind of excited to see him get the event that he deserves and see his ideas get complete form and get out there. I want to see what he's got.
One of the things that we have heard is there are going to be new versions of the Batman. There's going to be a sorcerer Batman. Mm-hmm. There's going to be other versions of the character. What kind of Batman are you hoping for? What's the one weird, out there idea that you think Snyder and Capullo could do with Batman?
I'm excited to see the sorcerer one. I don't really know what to expect. That's the kind of cool thing. With Metal, you kind of knew what their powers were just because you could see them, and they were all themed after the Justice League and stuff. I'm excited to kind of be left in the dark a little bit for this right now. I would really like to see a kind of a Batman, maybe who has the kind of powers that Zatanna does, or maybe Dr. Fate. This highly magically influenced, expert with magic Batman. That would be really cool. Because, I mean, Batman respects magic, but just seeing him, imagining what he could do with magic with the mind that he has, those could lead to some pretty fascinating stories. I'm really hoping we kind of get the same thing where, we get a one-shot kind of 48-page book of their origin and stuff like that. So I would love to read about a sorcerer Batman, how he got his powers, how he learned to use them, what he uses them for, how that his genius tactile mind works in tandem with his magic abilities and can influence the spells he uses and stuff like that. I think that'd be really cool. I'm excited for that.
What about a Swamp Thing Batman?
Oh, give that to me. If you give me a Batman that has like control of the green or something, oh, I'm definitely Or I'll tell you another one I would like to see would be something kind of like Etrigan with Jason Blood.
So we've kind of run the gamut on Greg Capullo and Snyder's work together. Of course, they also did Batman Last Night on Earth, which is a DC Black Label book. But I know that you're a huge fan of them as a creative duo. You always hear, "Don't meet your heroes." You went to a con, you met your heroes. What did you think of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo in person?
I've met them twice. I met them once at New York Comic Con, which was kind of a quicker meet. I didn't get too much time to talk to them. But then I met them at Baltimore Comic Con in like a special VIP thing. And that was very special. It's one circumstance where meeting your heroes is actually really good. Both of them were incredibly nice. You could tell they genuinely cared about their fans. They wanted to be there. The package deal that I bought for them at Baltimore Comic Con allowed you to get 5 items signed by each of them. And I kind of gave them like each 5 different things. And they never got upset about that. They never got mad. They were happy to sign things. And the couple things that really stood out to me about them, when I entered my master's program, I wanted to write comics. And I actually took time to talk to Scott about it, to Scott Snyder, and I just kind of said, hey, I'm going to be going into this graduate program in a couple months. What kind of advice would you give to, someone who would want to write for DC one day? And he's like, finish the master's program, take some creative writing courses, write every day, and just save up all of your money to pay for an artist to draw your ideas and start putting them out there. Give them to people like me at cons, give them to people like Greg. He gave me genuinely great advice. He didn't blow me off. He didn't treat me like I was a joke. He didn't treat me like I was a child. He gave me great one-on-one advice to that. And he actually, said at the end, he's like, I would hope to see your name on a book for us one day. Like, it would be great. So that really stood out to me, that he was that open and that nice about it. And Greg, I actually, when I met them the first time, it was, like I said, it was very quick. They kind of pushed you through. I had said to Greg, I had mentioned that Court of Owls had gotten me into comic books and that it was like my favorite story of all time. And he actually like yanked on my sleeve and said, why was it your favorite? What about that prompted you to get into comic books, and what about it was like made it your favorite? And I didn't even really know what to say to him because I was just so surprised to get that question from a content creator. It was very, very humble and very down to earth of him to just ask me that. Like, and I told him, and he's like, great, it's good to hear that stuff because that's how we get better. And I'm like, wow, that really stood out to me. And the second time that I met them, which I had a longer time with them, I had given Greg, I had an action figure 2-pack of the Gordon Batman, the robot, the police bot thing. And he actually took the time to like examine the figures in the box, and he was like, wow, look at the paint job on this thing. This looks awesome. Like, it's so cool to see something I drew get made into a toy that's this cool. And he actually sat there with me, and like we kind of went over the toy and like looked at some stuff on it, and like we're talking about the paint job. And then he was asking me what I thought about that comic arc. He's like, yeah, people didn't really gel with that. And I'm like, I thought it was great. And he's like, oh, good. I'm glad I met someone who liked it. So they were just really awesome people. Like they like when I left my meetings with them, I just had the biggest smile on my face. It's like, wow, like they really are that awesome. Meeting your heroes sometimes does work out. So yeah, those are two meetings and 2 moments in my life that like they're highlights for me. Like I think back to those and I smile. So
well, I want to thank you very much for sharing that with me and the viewers. Coming on here and talking about Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, the very best creative duo in comic books today. They're basically an institution in comics at the moment. They're about to do another huge event, but they've done so much in the past, and I think everyone should definitely go out there. You need to be reading Court of Owls if you haven't read it already. I'm not the biggest fan of Dark Knight's Metal, but it is very important. It is driving the DC universe at the moment. So it's got an indelible legacy moving forward, and I'm very glad that you got to meet them and they lived up to the hype and then some for you.
Oh yeah, they were awesome. I just want to say to everybody, like, DC's reprinting their Batman run in an omnibus format right now. I got the first one. Pick it up. It's worth it. Omnibuses are expensive, but pick it up. Just read it. Read the run start to finish. It's fantastic Batman stuff.
All right, thanks a lot, Josh.
Yeah, no problem, man. Anytime.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.